The 2021 Formula One season, most famous for having one of the most controversial ends in sporting history. But it wasn't just that last race in Abu Dhabi. Controversy filled the entirety of the season, with Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton going toe-to-toe throughout the season and often coming to blows. And also 18 other Formula One drivers existed as well. But what would happen if you removed all of these crashes, all of these incidents that happened in races between Lewis and Max? What would happen, in fact, if you just removed racing altogether in the 2021 season and made it just a qualifying only championship? Would it still be as close between Lewis and Max? Would it still go down to the wire in Abu Dhabi? And who would gain the most points and who would lose the most points as we enter the official 2021 qualifying only championship? The way this is going to work is I'm going to attribute points for qualifying instead of the race itself, with 25 points for the win, down to 1 point for 10th place. The sprint qualifying format was a little bit strange in 2021, with the sprint race giving the grid for Sunday's race. However, in this scenario, I am only looking at the qualifying main event. No sprints will be taken into account. The other thing to note is that engine penalties will not affect this championship. However, penalties accrued in qualifying sessions will be applied to the drivers. So without further waffling, let's jump right in to the Bahrain Grand Prix, where in real life, we saw the first tensions flare between Lewis and Max in this epic title fight, where Max overtook Lewis with 3 laps to go. However, he was adjudged to have been off track whilst making that overtake, and Red Bull asked him to give the position back. Lewis then went on to take the win, as Max couldn't re-overtake him. However, in this championship, in the qualifying only championship, Max Verstappen is the one that takes the early ascendancy, with Lewis Hamilton in second, and Valtteri Bottas rounds out the podium in P3. And it was quite a large margin that Max Verstappen managed to have in this race over Lewis Hamilton in second, 3.8 tenths. The leading margin. Charles Leclerc picks up P4 in this one, and Pierre Gasly has a great opening race of the season in P5, picking up 10 points for AlphaTauri. And a quick refresher for you, if you're really new to Formula One and you've never come across names like AlphaTauri before, basically AlphaTauri in 2021 are RB or Racing Bulls or V-Carb now, and Alfa Romeo were also competing in 2021 and they are now Kick Sauber. In fact, I'll just put all of the driver lineups on the screen right now so that you get a refresher of what 2021 looked like. The Drivers' Championship after the opening round, of course, it just looks like the opening race's result for the top 10. However, in the Constructors, we can see that Mercedes take the early advantage with Red Bull in second, and the Ferrari versus McLaren fight begins for P3 in the championship, with AlphaTauri only a little behind. We head to Imola for the second round of the qualifying only championship, and this time it's Lewis Hamilton that sits on the top step of the podium, with Sergio Perez taking further points away from title rival Max Verstappen, who finishes down in P3 in this one. However, this race in Imola was all about Lando Norris, who would have finished in P2 in this one had he not extended the track. His lap time got deleted and he was dropped from P2 to P7 in the order. Lando Norris's lap time deletion actually makes it the exact same order from 4th down to 7th as we saw in the opening round in Bahrain, with Valtteri Bottas having an absolutely miserable time in the Mercedes down in P8. In the Drivers' Championship, we see Lewis Hamilton taking the lead from Max Verstappen after this result in Imola, with Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly's consistency giving them P3 and P4, with Bottas and Perez hot on their heels. In the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull close up to Mercedes out front, and McLaren and Ferrari are level on points at this stage. Heading to the Portuguese Grand Prix next, Valtteri Bottas, after a poor timeout last round, takes the top step of the podium ahead of the 2 title protagonists, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who take home P2 and P3 respectively. The 2 Mercedes drivers taking home that 1-2, and were only separated by 7 thousandths of a second for that race win. Carlos Sainz picks up a decent P5 after a slow start to the season, and Esteban Ocon's P6 brings home crucial points for Alpine in the championship. Further down, Lando Norris makes it 3 P7s in a row. Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly once again can't be separated in this championship, and Sebastian Vettel picks up his first points of the season in P10. Hamilton extends his advantage out front in the Drivers' Championship with this result, and Valtteri Bottas jumps up to P3 in the championship after that win. Sergio Perez gets ahead of both Leclerc and Gasly, Norris jumps ahead of his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, and they are just narrowly in front of Carlos Sainz, and Esteban Ocon is the one rounding out the top 10 at this stage. In the Constructors' Championship, things remain as they were, with Mercedes extending their advantage out front, and Ferrari getting their foothold into P3. Round 4 of the qualifying-only championship brings us to the Spanish Grand Prix, where Lewis Hamilton becomes the first man this season to get multiple race wins, ahead of Max Verstappen in P2 and Valtteri Bottas in P3. Something tells me we might be seeing these three on the podium quite a lot this season. Charles Leclerc returns to P4, where he's finished 3 of the opening 4 rounds of this season, and it's another stunner for Esteban Ocon, coming home in P5 and taking home 10 points for Alpine. Daniel Ricciardo re-enters the points, and it's one to forget for Sergio Perez, who finishes down in P8. Hamilton now has a 13-point gap out front in the Drivers' Championship, and it's as we were from P3 down to P5. However, P6 at this stage is very hotly contested, with 3 drivers on 22 points, and Norris and Ocon only 2 points behind on 20. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes continue to extend that advantage out front from Red Bull, and Alpine get ahead of AlphaTauri, thanks to Esteban Ocon's recent successes. In the Monaco Grand Prix, it's absolutely beautiful scenes as Charles Leclerc takes home the win in his home Grand Prix. Of course, in the real-life race, the crash that Leclerc had at the end of qualifying saw him unable to compete in the race itself because his car was too damaged and he couldn't even start the race on Sunday. However, in this universe, he is a lot happier and takes home the first win that isn't a Red Bull or Mercedes driver this season. Max Verstappen and Valtteri Bottas pick up back-to-back P2 and P3s respectively, and Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris get both of their best results of the season so far. It's an absolute nightmare for Lewis Hamilton though, who's down in P7 in Monaco. Sebastian Vettel gets his best result of the season, and Antonio Giovinazzi picks up his first points of the season so far. This Hamilton blunder in Monaco brings Max to within 1 point of the lead of the championship, and Charles Leclerc's win brings him a lot closer to Valtteri Bottas for 3rd in the championship. Sainz and Norris both get ahead of Pierre Gasly after this race, and we now have a second page of Drivers' Championship standings, which Sebastian Vettel is currently leading. In the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari are actually now closer to Red Bull than Red Bull are to Mercedes, and AlphaTauri get back ahead of Alpine. Heading to the Baku City Street Circuit next, where Charles Leclerc unbelievably makes it back-to-back race wins. In a season dominated by cars other than his own, he somehow managed to pull this one out the bag, with Lewis Hamilton taking home P2, bouncing back from that Monaco disaster, and Max Verstappen rounds out the podium in P3. The no racing regulation here really comes in clutch to save Max Verstappen, who, of course, in the real race, had that dramatic puncture on the main straight. Absolutely not his fault, but it saw him completely out the race and scoring 0 points. It also saves Lewis Hamilton's blushes, because in this one he had that infamous brake magic issue that saw him spear off the track at that red flag restart. Anyway, back to the more important stuff. Yuki Tsunoda takes home his first points of the season, which translates to AlphaTauri's first double points finish of the season, with Pierre Gasly getting an incredibly impressive P4 finish. And Valtteri Bottas finds himself all the way down in P10, having a miserable time in Baku. In the Drivers' Championship, Charles Leclerc takes a magnificent P3 after his back-to-back race wins, and is actually only within 16 points of Max Verstappen for 2nd in the championship at this stage. Carlos Sainz moves ahead of Sergio Perez, and Pierre Gasly draws level with the Mexican driver. Fernando Alonso moves to level points with Sebastian Vettel, and Yuki Tsunoda's first points of the season bring him up to P13 in the championship. Ferrari get ever closer to Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship, and AlphaTauri pull well clear of Alpine at this stage. Moving into the French Grand Prix now, where we see Max Verstappen taking home his second race win of the season, his first since the opening round in Bahrain, and this sees him being the third driver to have 2 race wins this season. And of course, as you'd expect, it's the 2 Mercedes on the podium alongside him, with Lewis Hamilton in P2 ahead of Bottas in P3. Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz take home P4 and P5, and Pierre Gasly is starting to make P6 and above look normal for him this season. Fernando Alonso also makes it back-to-back P9 finishes. The win from Max Verstappen in France gives him the lead of the Drivers' Championship for the first time since that opening round in Bahrain. Valtteri Bottas gains some ground on Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez moves ahead of Carlos Sainz with Pierre Gasly close behind, and Fernando Alonso moves in to a standalone P11. In the Constructors' Championship, things remain as they were, but AlphaTauri are making up some serious ground on McLaren at this stage. We now move to the Styrian Grand Prix, the first of 2 races at the Red Bull Ring this season. Side note, COVID Formula 1 was really weird. But anyway, Max Verstappen makes it back-to-back race wins here, with Valtteri Bottas picking up P2 and Lewis Hamilton rounding out the podium in P3. Further down the order, Yuki Tsunoda would have finished in P8 in this one. However, due to him blocking Valtteri Bottas in the qualifying session, he got given a 3-place penalty, which drops him out of the points. This penalty for Yuki Tsunoda does, however, promote George Russell into the points to pick up his and Williams' first points of the season. In the Drivers' Championship, Bottas moves back into P3 ahead of Charles Leclerc, whilst Gasly moves ahead of Sainz, and Lando Norris is now level on points with the Spaniard. Alonso moves clear in P11, Lance Stroll draws level with Yuki Tsunoda for P13, and George Russell's 1 point moves him level with Antonio Giovinazzi at this stage. In the Constructors' Championship, things remain as they were before. However, Williams, of course, with this George Russell point, move level with Alfa Romeo. And in the second Austrian race of the season, Max Verstappen makes it 3 wins back-to-back-to-back in the championship. And his teammate Sergio Perez picks up P3 in this one, his first podium since Imola. But it's all about Lando Norris in P2 at the Red Bull Ring, with him and McLaren stepping onto the rostrum for the first time this season. It's an absolutely dismal day for Mercedes, who have neither driver on the podium for the first time this season. Yuki Tsunoda manages to right his Styrian Grand Prix wrongs, coming home in the points in tandem with Pierre Gasly, who hasn't finished outside of the top 6 in the last 5 rounds of the season. This time, however, the penalty goes to Sebastian Vettel, who would have finished in P8 like Yuki Tsunoda in the Styrian Grand Prix, but was given a 3-place penalty for blocking Fernando Alonso. This penalty promotes George Russell to an absolutely lofty P8 ahead of Lance Stroll, who gets back-to-back P9s, and Carlos Sainz leading home Charles Leclerc in a terrible day for Ferrari. Max Verstappen, after his stunning run of form, finds himself a full race win ahead in the lead of the championship at this stage. Lando Norris moves ahead of Pierre Gasly with this podium, and Daniel Ricciardo, his teammate, has only scored 1 point since Monaco. In the bottom half of the standings, Yuki Tsunoda catches up to Fernando Alonso, and Lance Stroll moves ahead of his teammate Sebastian Vettel. In the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull close up considerably to Mercedes after this round, and Williams move into P8. In the British Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton takes home the win, getting his first win since the 4th round of the season, and of course being the second driver to win their home race this season. Max Verstappen comes home in P2 in this one, of course managing to avoid that 51G crash with the wall, courtesy of Lewis Hamilton, that happened in real life. So he'll be happy about that change. And of course, it's Valtteri Bottas that comes home in P3. Daniel Ricciardo finally finds himself back in the points again, and George Russell makes it an unprecedented 3-point finishes in a row for him with Williams. In the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship, things remain as they were, and further down, George Russell claims P13 in the championship, and Sebastian Vettel draws back level with Lance Stroll. In the Constructors' Championship, things generally remain as they were, but Williams are slowly catching up to the back of Aston Martin thanks to George Russell's recent performances. Heading to the Hungarian Grand Prix now, where Lewis Hamilton makes it back-to-back race wins ahead of Valtteri Bottas in P2 taking valuable points away from Max Verstappen in P3. Unfortunately, in this version of events, we get no Esteban Ocon win in Hungary in 2021. However, he does lead home Fernando Alonso for an Alpine double points finish, and Sebastian Vettel, who finished P2 in real life but then was later disqualified, picks up a P10. We now find ourselves at the halfway point in the season, where the Drivers' Championship currently looks like this, and Lewis Hamilton has clawed the gap back to 9 points to Max Verstappen for the lead. Bottas manages to further cement himself into P3 in the championship at this stage, and the Mercedes 1-2 at the Hungarian Grand Prix means that their advantage out front extends in the Constructors' Championship. And also, with it being the halfway point in the season, if you are enjoying this video and you enjoy this style of videos, then if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel, that would mean a lot to me. Let's jump into the second half. And the second half kicks off with a bang with the Belgian Grand Prix in 2021, which, if you look at it, it was essentially a qualifying championship race in its real format. There was 2 laps of racing, but it wasn't really racing because the safety car was out. No one changed positions. So the result from that race is effectively the result here, except we're giving out full points for this one instead of half points, which means that Max Verstappen comes home in P1 and Lewis Hamilton comes home in P3. Kind of normal stuff. Except you see George Russell picking up an absolutely unbelievable P2 in a Williams car that has only scored points on 3 occasions this season. He somehow finds himself in P2 in this one, and I think this is really where that sort of Mr. Saturday reputation kicked off for him. This P2 for George Russell is also his first podium in Formula 1, and of course, as we know, he gets plenty more in his career from this point. It's also a best of season result for both Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel in P4 and P5 in this one. This absolutely crazy result leaves the Drivers' Championship looking like this at this stage, with Pierre Gasly gaining on Lando Norris and George Russell jumping into the top 10 in the championship. And further down the order, Sebastian Vettel's P5 finish in this one moves him up to 12th in the championship. And in the Constructors' Championship, Williams managed to move ahead of Aston Martin for P7. We head to the Dutch Grand Prix next for the 13th round of the qualifying only championship, where Max Verstappen becomes the 3rd driver this season to win his home race, in what is his 6th race win of the season. And as we've come to expect at this stage, it's the Mercedes cars rounding out the podium, with Lewis in P2 and Valtteri in P3. Pierre Gasly equals his best result of the season in P4, ahead of both Ferrari cars, who pick up a much needed large haul of points after scoring only 6 points across the last 2 rounds as a team. Speaking of 6 points, it's an absolutely stunning P7 finish for Antonio Giovinazzi, picking up his and Alfa Romeo's 2nd points finish of the season, and it's a large one. In the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen once again has a full race wins advantage at the top. Pierre Gasly takes advantage of a pointless Lando Norris at the Dutch Grand Prix to overtake him in the championship, and Esteban Ocon retakes P10 from George Russell. Fernando Alonso gains on Sebastian Vettel, and Antonio Giovinazzi finds himself ahead of Lance Stroll at this stage. And in the Constructors' Championship, things remain as they were. We come to Italy for the 2nd time this season, and this time to Monza, where unfortunately we have no Daniel Ricciardo race win in this universe, and no Verstappen and Hamilton pile up at the first corner. As you can see, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen both finish on the podium instead of out of the race in this one, but it's Valtteri Bottas who's picking up P1, getting his 2nd race win of the season. McLaren still do get a very decent result in the context of their season, picking up P4 and P5 in this one, and Antonio Giovinazzi makes it back-to-back points with this race in Monza. In the Drivers' Championship, Gasly and Norris both gain further on Sergio Perez for P5, but things remain as they are up and down the board. And the same can be said about the Constructors' Championship at this stage, but Mercedes now have a 63-point advantage over Red Bull in P2. Moving into the Russian Grand Prix next, where we have an absolutely crazy result. Lando Norris comes home to take his first ever career race win in P1 at the Russian Grand Prix, ahead of Carlos Sainz in P2, picking up his first podium of the season and Ferrari's first since Charles Leclerc's win in Baku. And then in P3, we unbelievably have George Russell picking up his second podium of the season. Outside of the podium places, we have both Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso picking up their best results of the season so far, and Daniel Ricciardo makes it back-to-back P5 finishes. Max Verstappen unbelievably finishes outside of the podium places for the first time this season. Of course, in real life, he had engine penalties at the Russian Grand Prix, which meant that he was going to start at the back of the grid no matter where he qualified. So he didn't qualify for this one. So obviously, as we're not counting engine penalties in this championship, I'll take a little bit of creative liberty and say that he was just feeling kind and he wanted to let other drivers experience the podium this season. This win brings Lando Norris up to P5 in the championship, and George Russell's podium moves him back into the top 10 in the championship. Alonso moves ahead of Vettel in the championship, and Lance Stroll draws level with Yuki Tsunoda. The Constructors' Championship stays as is. It's Turkish Grand Prix time for round 16 of the championship, and Lewis Hamilton leads home a Mercedes 1-2 with Max Verstappen in P3. Leclerc in P4 gets his best result of the season since Silverstone, Alonso makes it back-to-back P6 finishes, and Yuki Tsunoda gets his third points finish of the season. This win from Lewis Hamilton moved him to within 1 point of Max Verstappen for the lead of the championship with only 6 rounds to go. Fernando Alonso's solid recent results move him level on points with his teammate Esteban Ocon, and the Constructors' Championship stays as it is. Moving into the US Grand Prix next, where Max Verstappen returns to the top step of the podium ahead of Lewis Hamilton in P2, and Sergio Perez in P3 gets his first podium since the Austrian Grand Prix. It nearly looks like Noah is reassembling his arc, with them coming 2 by 2 from 5th down to 10th place, with Yuki Tsunoda picking up his second points finish back-to-back. Max Verstappen's win gives him slight breathing space to Lewis Hamilton behind him in second. Sergio Perez's podium moves him up to 2 points behind Lando Norris at this stage, and Yuki Tsunoda draws level with Lance Stroll. And it seems like things are pretty set in stone in the Constructors' Championship at this stage. Into the Mexican Grand Prix we go, where it's our 5th Mercedes 1-2 of the season, this time Valtteri Bottas picking up the win. Interestingly, every single time that Valtteri Bottas has won the race this season, it's been Lewis Hamilton in P2 and Max Verstappen in P3. Sergio Perez in his home race picks up P4 ahead of Pierre Gasly, who once again gets a very solid P5. Daniel Ricciardo outperforms Lando Norris 2 rounds in a row for the first time since the opening 2 rounds of the season. The Drivers' Championship is as follows, with Sergio Perez moving ahead of Lando Norris for P5. And in the bottom half of the championship, Yuki Tsunoda picks up P14. And the Constructors' Championship looks like this after round 18. At the Brazilian Grand Prix, it was Lewis Hamilton that took home P1. However, he was later disqualified for a DRS infringement, dropping him out of the points and completely to the back of the grid. And of course, it was none other than his title rival Max Verstappen that was promoted to P1 because of this disqualification. Talk about controversy. Bottas and Perez pick up P2 and P3 ahead of Pierre Gasly in P4, and then once again it's 2 by 2 from P5 down to P10 in this one. This result and Lewis Hamilton's disqualification moves Max 30 points clear in the Drivers' Championship with 3 rounds to go. Can Lewis possibly claw it back at this stage? Sergio Perez closes up to Charles Leclerc, Pierre Gasly moves to only 3 points behind Lando Norris, and Fernando Alonso gets ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon for the first time this season. The Constructors' Championship looks like this at this stage, with Mercedes right on the edge of confirming themselves as champions. At the Qatar Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton rights his wrongs from that disqualification in Brazil and returns to the top step of the podium. However, this time, he's not accompanied by his usual friends, Verstappen and Bottas, but instead by Pierre Gasly in P2, who rounds off a stunning season with this incredible P2 finish, and Fernando Alonso picking up an amazing P3 and sort of caps off that resurgence that he's had towards the end of this season. Max Verstappen did actually finish P2 in this one, however he was given a 5-place grid penalty for blocking Pierre Gasly in qualifying, which drops him down to P7, and Valtteri Bottas would have been on the podium in P3, but he was handed a 3-place penalty for for ignoring double-waved yellow flags. This result and these penalties move Lewis Hamilton back to within a shot of getting that title, whilst further down, Pierre Gasly moves ahead of Lando Norris, with the pair of drivers inches behind Sergio Perez for P5 at this stage. Fernando Alonso finds himself in the top 10 in the championship for the first time this season, and Yuki Tsunoda draws level on points with Sebastian Vettel. And in the Constructors' Championship, Max Verstappen's penalty coupled with Sergio Perez scoring no points in Qatar mean that Mercedes take home the Constructors' Championship win with 2 rounds left to go. In the penultimate round of the season, we move to Saudi Arabia, where Lewis Hamilton leads home Valtteri Bottas in a Mercedes 1-2, with Max Verstappen picking up P3. There's no room for any brake checking or DRS chicken in this one. Actually, let me just have a quick rant about the 2021 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I feel like that was probably one of the worst representations of Formula 1 in the modern era that we have seen. I mean, like, the way that Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were driving in that race, it was just, like, not a good watch at all. So, if anything, the qualifying championship makes me feel a little bit happier about this one. Anyway, back to it. Charles Leclerc comes home in P4 to get his best result of the season since the Turkish Grand Prix, and Antonio Giovinazzi gets more points for Alfa Romeo. Hamilton's win in Saudi Arabia brings him to within 1 point of Max Verstappen going into the last round of the season. Sound familiar? The rest of the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship remains the same, and Yuki Tsunoda moves clear in P13. And here's a quick look at the Constructors' Championship as we head into the final round of the season. With 1 point in it, it all comes down to this. In this version of the championship, we don't have the controversial end that we saw in real life, but we do have the same result of the season, with Max Verstappen taking home the win in Abu Dhabi, and with it, taking home the 2021 Drivers' Championship. Lewis Hamilton comes home in P2 ahead of Lando Norris, getting his 3rd podium finish of the season in P3. And Yuki Tsunoda makes it 3 P8 finishes in a row to round out this season. And this is how the entirety of the Drivers' Championship looks in our 2021 qualifying only championship, with Max Verstappen confirmed to be the champion ahead of Lewis Hamilton in P2 and Valtteri Bottas in P3. It's an incredible P4 for Charles Leclerc ahead of Sergio Perez in P5, and Lando Norris's podium at the end of the season moves him ahead of Pierre Gasly for P6. And here we can see an entire breakdown of how the regular championship compared to the qualifying championship. The biggest movers are Charles Leclerc gaining 3 positions in the qualifying championship, his teammate Carlos Sainz losing 3 positions, Pierre Gasly gains 2 positions, George Russell gains 4 positions, both the Aston Martin drivers Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel lose 2 positions, and Antonio Giovinazzi gains 2 positions. And here is a comparison between the regular Constructors' Championship and the qualifying Constructors' Championship. As you can see, Mercedes gain a massive 100 points over the regular season, with Red Bull gaining just 0.5 points over the regular season. AlphaTauri gain a massive chunk of points, and with it a position in the championship ahead of Alpine, who lost half of their points in this experiment. And Williams almost double their points to take home P7, whilst Aston Martin's points are over halved. Gonna flash some stats up on the screen for you. If you want to pause the video to take a deeper look, then feel free. We've got Valtteri Bottas gaining the most amount of points this season with Pierre Gasly, and in terms of a percentage of the original points that they got in the championship, it's Giovinazzi and George Russell that gain the most in this experiment. Ricciardo, Ocon and Alonso are the ones that lose the most points versus the real championship, and in terms of a percentage of the real championship, Kimi Räikkönen and Nicholas Goat Tiffy lose 100% of their points. And with all that said and done, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I love making this style of content, so if you want to see more seasons, let me know down below, and I will see you there.